All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to be showing our presentation in a minute, but just wanted to go ahead and introduce myself and Tanya Bowman, who is my other co-host. So I'm Hannah Vickery. I'm the communications specialist for the Tennessee Disability Coalition. And then Tanya, do you just want to introduce yourself real quick?
I am Tanya Bowman. I am the Family Resource Specialist for Family Voices of Tennessee.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now, if you'll bear with us. All right. Tanya, do you want to talk a little bit about Family Voices real quick?
Family Voices of Tennessee, as it says, supporting families of children with special health care needs, chronic illness, and disabilities. We ourselves are parents of children with special health care needs, so we have that connection to families.
Awesome. Right. So we just want to go through a few webinar etiquette guidelines to ensure that we all can have the best experience possible during this webinar. So you'll notice that you've been muted by myself and Tanya, and we just ask that you please stay muted for the duration of the webinar, with the exception of we're going to be doing an ADA scenarios discussion later, and at that point we will enable you to unmute yourselves. But for the rest of the webinar, just ask that you stay muted. And same with the video. Your video, we were not able to turn off your video, but if you feel comfortable to and would like to, we'd appreciate if you'd turn off your video as well. But that's just a suggestion. There is a chat box on the right side of your Zoom, or you can press the button at the bottom of your screen. I'm looking for it right now at the bottom of mine. And yeah, where it says more, and you can just scroll up and hit chat. And so if you think of a question throughout this webinar, we're gonna have, if there's time at the end, a Q&A portion where you can ask us questions and we'll try and answer them. But we'll be taking those questions through the chat box. And if you would not like to put them in the chat, I'll show you our email addresses in a minute that you can direct them to one of our email addresses, myself or Tanya, and we can get back to you later. And if we don't get to your questions in the chat box, we will also be getting back to you later within the next week or so with either an answer or a suggestion or reference to the Southeast ADA Center for their help. And lastly, we'll be sending out a survey after the webinar. So we just ask that if you have time, we would really appreciate if you would complete the survey. It will really help us. Hold on. All right, so this is our email addresses. It's Hannah, HANNAH _V at tndisability.org. And then Tanya's is TONYA _B at tndisability.org. Or if you would like to give us a call after, you can call us at our main line at 615-383-9442. And our receptionist will be able to direct your questions to me, Tanya, or Donna DeStefano. who is the Tennessee Disability Coalition's ADA coordinator and assistant director. And we'll put the slide up at the end too in case you need to go back to it. So let's get started. A little bit about the coalition is that we are a member nonprofit, a member agency nonprofit organization, which just means that we work with a variety of members who our main mission is to create a society that values, includes, and supports Tennesseans with disabilities. And we do that through our public policy efforts and programs such as the Family Voices of Tennessee. We are also an affiliate of the Southeast ADA Center. And we do that, we are the Tennessee's designated affiliate center who can provide information and resources on the ADA. And then if we aren't able to answer your questions, we generally refer you to the Southeast ADA Center, and there's going to be contact information for them at the end of the presentation. So we're gonna start off with, why does the ADA, or the Americans with Disability Act, matter? This year is the 30th anniversary of the passage of the ADA, but there were many years leading up to the passage that made it possible, and it's important to remember that and the hard work of disability rights advocates before us. The ADA is a civil rights law aimed at making sure that everyone has a seat at the table and is able to exercise their rights and their voice at the table. The ADA is not a law meant to cause more harm than good, or to cost your business lots of money, or to give you a lawsuit. The ADA can get a really bad rep because of this, but its intent is to make sure that everyone finds access in public spaces, in our places of work, has rights in our employment, is included, and can find the independence that we need to navigate the world outside of our homes. We are all valued members of society, and this law makes sure to uphold that sentiment. The ADA is 30 years old, but it is still considered a baby law by many due to its very slow implementation. So younger adults and teenagers are also not fully aware of what the law even is, or what their rights are underneath the law, or why it even matters for people with disabilities. And not just young adults and teenagers, but everyone, whether or not you have a disability. It's important to know why the ADA matters and what the law is. And that's why we're doing this webinar today. So the bottom line is that your rights and your voice matter, and your presence as a valued human being matters. And that's why the ADA matters, because it aids us in exercising our voices and our needs in our communities. So a lot of the information that we're going to be going over today is taken from the ADA National Network and their ADA Trainers Network. And so we just want to read through this disclaimer really quick before we move on. So it just says, information, materials, and/or technical assistance are intended solely as informal guidance and are neither in determination of your legal rights or responsibilities under the ADA, nor binding on any agency with enforcement responsibility under the ADA. The Mid-Atlantic ADA Center is authorized by the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research to provide information, materials, and technical assistance to individuals and entities that are covered by the ADA. The contents of this document were developed under a grant from the Department of Education, NIDRR grant number H133A110020. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. All right. Okay.
And here's our legislative timeline of rights, civil rights acts, acts that apply to people with disabilities. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed that did not include disability. 1968, the Architectural Barriers Act. 1973, Rehabilitation Act. 1975, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, IDA. 1986, the Air Carrier Access Act. 1988, Fair Housing Amendments Act. 1990, ADA. In 2008, ADA amendments. Who has rights under the ADA? The ADA applies to people who have a disability, record of or regarded as having a disability, have an association with a person with a disability. A disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. There are 5 titles of the ADA. Title I regards employment, prohibits disability discrimination in all employment processes. Title II, accessibility in public entities, physical and program accessibility in state and local government entities. Title III, accessibility in business, physical and program accessibility in restaurants, hotels, stores, places of business. Title IV, telecommunications, telephone and communication systems for the public. And Title V is miscellaneous, protection from retaliation. Who is covered? Must comply with the ADA. Entities with 15 or more employees, public, government agencies, regardless of whether or not they receive federal assistance, privately operated commercial entities. For example, private schools and colleges, banks, restaurants, theaters, hotels, private transportation, supermarkets, shopping malls, museums, recreational facilities, sports arenas, medical, legal, and insurance offices. Exempt, private clubs and religious organizations.
All right, so we're just going to go over the different types of disabilities that the ADA covers. And as a reminder that no matter what disability or chronic illness you may have, that we are all in this together, as me and Tanya have our t-shirts on today. Remember, a disability, as Tanya just said, is defined under the ADA as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. You also have rights if you are a family member or someone with a disability, or an employer of someone with a disability, or have any kind of association or relationship with someone with a disability under the ADA. So let's start with neurological disabilities. Neurological disabilities are disabilities that affect the brain, such as Alzheimer's, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury or TBI, and stroke. There are many other neurological disabilities as well. It may affect your physical functioning, your interactions with others, your learning and memory, but the effects of each disability are very unique to every individual, and these side effects are a very limited list, and it, just like with brain injury, it truly varies from person to person and has a wide range of effects and that sort of thing.
Physical and mobility disabilities. This includes any impairment that impacts a person's use of their body or limbs. It may involve using mobility devices, prosthetics, and other equipment to aid in performing tasks.
Speech disabilities are disabilities that refer to any cause that makes it difficult to our speech. There are many different causes for speech disabilities, and some can even stem or be side effects of a bigger disability that you may have. It's estimated that 2.6 million people in the US have difficulty having their speech understood. And speech disabilities can sometimes be accompanied by facial, muscle, and or vocal inflections.
Learning disabilities. Learning disabilities are a childhood disorder characterized by difficulty with certain skills such as reading or math, writing, Learning disabilities may affect the ability to interpret what one sees or hears, or the ability to link information from different parts of the brain.
Psychiatric disabilities affect our mental health. These kinds of disabilities can include depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and more. Typically, psychiatric disabilities are the result of a larger brain disorder or disability, but most mental illnesses can be treated or helped.
PTSD, depression, and TBI was mentioned earlier. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Approximately 20% of return veterans screen positive for post-traumatic stress disorder or depression. Traumatic brain injury, it's a common veteran injury or can be a sports injury. Every TBI is different and has different effects, often invisible effects.
Visual disabilities are disabilities that affect our vision or eyesight. Approximately 1.8 million people in the US have a severe visual impairment or blindness. There are varying levels of visual disabilities from very slight to very severe. And it's important to note that not all people with visual disabilities read Braille. And another great reminder that every person and every individual is unique and different, and how we live life with our disability ranges from person to person. Our needs vary, and that's part of what the ADA is meant to cover, is our needs and those accommodations.
Hearing disabilities are vast. 1 million Americans have trouble hearing normal conversation. The number sharply increases with age. 30% of people over age 65 have difficulty hearing. And there are varying degrees of hearing disabilities, from unilateral hearing loss to bilateral, wearing hearing aids or having cochlear implants, being totally deaf. So there are varying degrees, and how it affects each person is individual to that person's situation.
Intellectual disabilities refer to disabilities that affect the test of our functional and mental abilities to complete tasks. Intellectual disabilities can arise from many different causes, including another disability that someone or you may have. It's important to note that intellectual disabilities do not always present with developmental disabilities. So just remember, like we've just said, the same disability can affect people in very different ways. And, two people can have the same disability or chronic illness, and their side effects and are not going to be the same. And so therefore their needs and accommodations are not going to be the same. So now we're just going to go through a few real life scenarios to help us better understand how the ADA applies to everyday situation. And we just want to say before we get started is to not feel overwhelmed by the nuance of these situations, meaning that in some situations the ADA may apply and in others it may not. It really does vary from situation to situation, and it's not always a black and white answer. There are other disability laws in place for housing and travel, etc. The ADA does not cover. So as we like to say here at the Tennessee Disability Coalition, it really depends. Yeah, so what's going to happen now as we go into these scenarios, I am going to, or Tanya will, allow you to unmute yourselves if you would like. We're going to go through, through scenarios like this, and what's going to happen is Tanya or I will read through the scenario, and then we're just going to give a minute or so if anybody would like to respond and take a guess at it, or any really, really brief discussion around it, and then we're going to go over the answer and then move on to the next one. And so bear with us if there are any technical difficulties. All right.
Yes, please. So our first scenario, Daniel went to a popular restaurant. He has a learning disability that makes reading difficult for him. When the server offered Daniel a menu, he declined and asked the server instead to verbally describe his menu options. The server said it's all on the menu, dropped the menu on the table, and stepped away. Is this situation covered under the ADA? If so, what title? And I'm gonna unmute right now all.
Alert, the host has unmuted all participants. Alert, audio now unmuted.
That is Title III.
Correct. Whoever said Title III, yes. Some explanation for this one. Restaurants are one of the 12 types of establishments referred to as places of public accommodation under the law. Businesses that serve the public must ensure that goods that they provide are accessible to customers with disabilities, even when the disability is not obvious, like in the case of Neil's learning disability.
I don't have to take a test or anything, I'm just living it on the run. Like, okay then.
The next scenario is about Rodney. Rodney, an individual with a hearing impairment.
Alert, audio now unmuted. Alert, the host has unmuted all participants.
7, 2.
All right. I believe I'm
Test and my milestone test. I barely passed.
So did the patron with the intellectual disability have to make a written request for reasonable accommodation?
or if you're having background noise, would you mind muting yourself, please?
Well, the way they ask the question on the actual milestone.
Okay, so is that for the first scenario or for this one?
Alert, Craig Callahan has left the meeting.
Times during COVID. Whoever asked that previous question, if you're still on, do you mind repeating it?
What the final was. Because I went and wrote out that
All
question.
right, so we'll just move on for now. So I'll begin reading again. Rodney, an individual with a hearing impairment, is starting classes to obtain a real estate broker license. When he attends the first class, Rodney discovers that he cannot hear the instructor. So he asks for an assistive learning device. The private company that offers the class refuses to provide the device. Is this situation covered under the ADA? And if so, what title? Any guesses? All right, so this situation, Rodney would be covered under the ADA, under Title III, which covers accessibility in private businesses. Private businesses, such as educational entities that offer goods and services to the public, keyword there, to the public, must be accessible. In situations in which accommodations are needed, a business may require individuals with disabilities to request these accommodations in advance. Any policy must be reasonable, such as 24 to 48-hour notice, and should be clearly marked on any promotional material, such as flyers, emails, etc., asking for if somebody needs an accommodation. Right.
Hold on a second here. I'm going to try to mute this. Okay. Nina, an individual who is blind, uses her city's fixed bus route system. She is frustrated because the drivers do not consistently announce the bus stops. This makes it more difficult for Nina to independently find her way to destinations. Is this situation covered under ADA? If so, what title?
Alert, the host has unmuted all participants.
Alex?
Audio now unmuted.
Yes, Title II.
Yes, it is Title II. Title II of the ADA concerns programs and services offered by state and local municipalities, governments. Public transportation is covered. While the DOJ enforces, Department of Justice enforces Title II in most situations in case of public transportation, the Department of Transportation oversees implementation of the ADA.
Of course, Nina doesn't necessarily have a disability that would qualify her for under Title II.
Would you say that again?
Yes, Nina has a visual impairment, and under the ADA, covers any disability that causes limitations in terms of being able to, limitations of doing things. I'll go back and read the definition again. It's defined under the ADA as a physical, so physical blindness would fall under that, or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And so her blindness substantially limits one or more major life activities. So that disability definition applies to all the titles. Tanya, is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, I think that covers it.
Awesome. Yes, and a lot of you are asking if we're going to send slides or the materials that we're giving in this webinar. And yes, we have, because you registered, we have your email address. And so we will be sending out an email with the survey and also the slides for today. All right.
I have a question about the screen referring to Nina. Would she be required to present some type of documentation to, say, a bus driver to require them to ensure they say the stops? Obviously, it would be best practice, but could they refuse her if she couldn't, quote unquote, prove the disability?
Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that you have to prove anything in that moment that you have a disability. You would if, for example, again, you were doing a lawsuit in the ADA and trying to uphold your rights. And that way, then you would have to provide documentation to prove that you're upholding your rights. But I don't believe in that moment, like if you're in a store and you have a service animal, I don't think they can ask you for your documentation of why you can have a service animal or that sort of thing. That kind of falls within discrimination. But that's also a question that we can for sure ask our ADA coordinator. But I believe that's what the answer would be there.
Donna responded in the chat box saying you don't have to prove a disability.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Yes, I have a little bit on service animals at the end. Service animals are, in my opinion, a whole different department, if you will, of the ADA, because it's so complex, the guidelines. And so we're going to do a little bit of that at the end, just basics of that. But then we always say service animals, again, every situation is nuanced. There's no black and white. Even the person who trained me and Tanya for the ADA training network was saying that she doesn't have sufficient knowledge of ADA service animals, or more complex than what the basics are. So to always contact the ADA the Southeast ADA Center, because they do have somebody who that's their job and they're very knowledgeable about that. Right. All right. Moving on. All right. Rhonda is a double amputee who uses prosthetics on both legs. She would like to get a service dog to assist her with balance and retrieving items. The property manager at the private apartment complex where she lives is refusing to allow her to keep a dog in her apartment, citing the no pets policy. Is this situation covered under the ADA? And if so, what title?
Alert, the host has unmuted all participants. Alert, audio now unmuted.
All right, I see a guess at Title III. Any other guesses?
I think it's covered under the Fair Housing Amendment Act, not the ADA.
So it's not covered under the ADA. It is covered under the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination based on disability and requires reasonable modifications to policies that meet the needs of individuals. However, Title III of the ADA, if you're in an apartment complex and you go into their office building, those are areas considered as not housing. So the ADA would going into their public office. Yeah. Right.
Hannah, they asked to repeat that.
The answer?
Yes.
Okay. So the ADA does not apply in that situation. The Fair Housing Act, which is separate from the ADA, does apply here. And the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based on disability and requires reasonable modifications to policies to meet the needs of individuals. Title III of the ADA, however, does cover public use areas within the housing, such as a rental office. If you were to go in there and had a service animal, that would apply under the ADA because it's technically not a housing development at that point. It's a public use rental office. So yeah, there's a lot of laws that meet each other in this, kind of like this situation.
Our next scenario is Regina. Regina's a software engineer, has diabetes. Her employer, a large firm, frequently requires her to work late with little to no advance notice. Because of this, Regina is not able to eat dinner at a consistent time, resulting in dangerous fluctuations of her blood sugar level. Is this situation covered under the ADA? If so, what title? I see the correct answer. Title I, yes. Title I covers employment provisions, and it applies to this situation. Individuals with obvious and non-obvious disabilities may request reasonable accommodations in order to perform essential job functions. Regina could ask for a more regular schedule to take a meal break, regardless of her work hours, in order to keep her diabetes under control. This is a reasonable accommodation.
Caitlin. Caitlin's doctor's office calls her to schedule an appointment to review her options for addressing her recent cancer diagnosis. She is understandably concerned and tells the receptionist that her husband is deaf and will be accompanying her to the appointment. She asks that the office provide a sign language interpreter so that her husband can participate in the appointment. Is this situation covered under the ADA? And if so, what title?
Alert, the host has unmuted all participants. Alert, audio now unmuted.
What? Later.
Hi. All right, so Caitlin and her husband are covered under the ADA under Title III. It follows private entities such as doctors' offices must make sure that their services are accessible. And there's been a lot of issues with this actually. But as such, they're required to provide effective communication, and effective communication just means that communication that works best for everyone. For example, if I was deaf or hard of hearing, I may use cochlear implants, or I may choose not to wear, or I may speak sign language, or I may not speak sign language. And so that's kind of effective communication and making sure that everybody gets the information and communication that they need. So as such, they're required to provide effective communication to people with hearing, vision, or speech impairments. Again, effective communication is different for everyone, and accommodations needed to adhere to effective communication are different for everyone under the ADA. Caitlin is also, because she's in close relationship, she's with her husband, and the ADA would cover her husband in this instance. And Caitlin as well, because, you know, her husband is deaf, but then Caitlin is in close association, and it's important that her husband hear and learn the information that she's learning, because this cancer diagnosis could be life-threatening or very serious. So she can exercise her rights, and her husband can exercise his rights under the ADA.
Hey, Hannah, there's a question. Should Caitlin expect to be billed from Samantha? Should Caitlin expect to be billed for the service?
I don't believe so. There are instances where, you know, if you go above and, you know, beyond what the basic services are, but in this instance, no, because she's just asking for a sign language interpreter, and that's effective communication. Yes, and Donna just said that it's the responsibility of the doctor's office to provide the accommodation. And again, another way to advocate, because we've seen in doctor's offices that this can be an issue, and so another way to advocate. Yeah. I mean.
Our next scenario, Naomi is applying for a job at a large department store. While completing the application, she discovers there's a question asking if she has a disability. Is this situation covered under the ADA? If so, what title?
Let's see, Samantha is saying employers can ask but cannot require an answer. And then Jacob just guessed Title I.
And it is under Title I, and no, employers are not allowed to ask if you have a disability or ask any questions that would require them to possibly disclose a disability. They are allowed to ask if you're able to perform essential functions of the job, but not for you to disclose.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if there's, if you're able to perform the essential function, they're able to ask that. And if you can, and you just need an accommodation to do so, then they can't discriminate on that. They would need to be able to provide the accommodation. But if you can't perform the essential function, that's the job, that's where as an employee, you're protected because no, they can't discriminate based on your disability. But if in some way or some fashion, in a way that suits you, if you're not able to do that essential job function, then it's not considered discrimination, because at that point, they're just looking for somebody to fill the principal duties. So that's a great example of how the ADA actually provides certain protections for, employers and not necessarily only people with disabilities. Let's see. Is it okay to require any accommodations to perform this job? I honestly am not sure. Yes, Donna just said in the application process, they can ask how the person would do a job. To ask if they need accommodations, the person would need to reveal disability. So at that point, you would be required. All right, let's see. And that's only if the person is hired and needs an accommodation. You can't discriminate while you're hiring. But once they're hired, obviously still can't discriminate, but you can ask what accommodations would be needed and would need to discuss. All right, moving on to the next scenario. Tim is a wheelchair user and he's traveling by air. The airline charged him a baggage fee to transport his wheelchair. Is this situation covered under the ADA? And if so, what title? Right, I'm not seeing any guesses, so let's see.
Somebody said Title III.
Okay, and Linda has the answer. It is not covered under the ADA. It is covered under the Air Carrier Accessibility Act. Similar to the Fair Housing Act, they kind of covers each other's gaps. The Air Carrier Accessibility Act is similar to the ADA, but it applies specifically to airlines and aircrafts. Under the ACAA, travelers cannot be charged for the transport of mobility devices to be used during their trip. The ADA does, however, apply to public features of airports, such as parking areas, restrooms, retail establishments inside the airport. So again, the situation, it really just, really does depend. All right.
Next scenario, Sybil is a public high school student who is paraplegic. His school has a swimming pool that was built in the 1980s. Sybil would like to participate in the community swimming classes offered at the school. Although he can get to the pool area in his wheelchair, there is no accessible way for him to get in and out of the pool. His parents have asked the school to provide a portable lift that will allow Sybil to enter and exit the pool and attend the same swimming class as his peers. Is this situation covered under the ADA? If so, what title? We have two correct answers, Jody and Jacob. Title II, that is correct. As a public entity, the services available at the school need to be accessible and provide equal opportunity for participation by people with disabilities.
All right. Chris and his friend Pete go to the local movie theater to check out the new action film. Pete uses a wheelchair. Although the theater offers accessible seating where Pete can stay in his wheelchair and Chris can sit next to him, it's closer to the screen than either of them prefers. Pete leaves his wheelchair accessible seating area and sits a couple rows back in a regular seat. Shortly before the movie starts, a theater employee tells Pete that he has to sit in his wheelchair, and if he does not comply, he and Chris will need to leave. Is this situation covered under the ADA? And if so, what title? All right, we got a guess for Title III, and that is correct. It is covered under Title III and by Title V, which is miscellaneous. As a private business, the theater must be accessible, but it cannot require patrons to use or be limited by accessible features such as wheelchair seating. That's discrimination, and the ADA prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities and their companions of family members, friends, colleagues, caregivers, etc. So this is why the ADA is important for everyone to know about, and a reminder that we can become disabled at any time, and our friends, family members, and coworkers without disabilities are also protected under the ADA, and if they're discriminated against based on their affiliation with a person with a disability. All right, we're gonna briefly on service animals. We're not gonna do any discussion. The discussion part is through, but just wanted to point out a couple of basics about service animals because it is a hot topic. Service animals under the ADA are defined as dogs or miniature horses, only dogs or miniature horses, that have been trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. The tasks must be related to the person's disability. And then the individual with a disability is responsible for any disruptions caused by service animals. For example, if your service dog is misbehaving in a grocery store or has an accident in a grocery store, it is okay for the grocery store to ask the individual with a disability to clean up after their dog or to remove their dog. However, you can only be asked to remove your service animal from a premises if your service animal is not, if it's being unruly or disruptive. But at that point, yes, your animal can be removed, but you cannot. You still have a right to be in there. And if your service animal is acting the way it's supposed to, you can't be removed. So that would be discrimination because your service animal is there to aid you as an accommodation. So I just wanted to leave those there real quick. Leave any questions you have about that in the chat box. And we're going to keep moving on. All right, so we've gone through all the scenarios. Hopefully today you've seen the foundations of how and why the ADA was built and passed. You've seen your rights, why your rights matter, and what your rights are under the ADA. We've gone over real life scenarios to help you determine what your rights are in certain situations, and that all situations are different and fluid, and it's okay to ask for help and understand the ADA. Tanya and I were trained a little under a year ago by the ADA Trainers Network, and we still have lots of questions and don't fully understand the ADA. And that's why you have your resources, such as the Southeast ADA Center or your regional ADA Center to help you with that. So we just wanted to give a little bit of the basics today to get you jump started. So exercise your rights under the ADA, both as a person with a disability and without, or as a business owner and as a consumer or employee. The ADA was created from the hard work of disability rights advocates, activists before us. And now it's our turn to carry the torch and carry on their work. It's our responsibility now. There is still much to be done. We've come a long ways, but we still have a very long ways to go when it comes to disability rights. The ADA is still not being fully implemented in certain areas, and as our world evolves, the ADA will need to evolve as well, and we're going to need yours and mine and everyone's advocacy to make sure that our rights are upheld as it happens, such as in accessible technology and that sort of thing, and making the ADA evolve with that as well. So yes, the law exists, but it is static and it means nothing if we don't own the ADA and our rights under the ADA. Only then does it become a living, breathing law that ensures that every individual, regardless of their different abilities and strengths, is included and valued in our society. You are all strong advocates, and the ADA is just one piece of disability advocacy. There's so much more. We have the power to advocate for and transform disability rights over the next 30 years and beyond. The ADA only stays relevant if we make it so. So just remember, we are all in this together, as me and Tanya have been saying throughout this webinar. The ADA is a great tool and a reminder to help us make sure that we're in this together and advocate and go further together. So we have a few minutes here before we end the webinar. And yes, Marcia just shared some of the ADA Celebrate themes for this year. We'd love, the National ADA Network would love for you to, as you're out and about in public, being safe, of course, with your masks on and getting back into public spaces, that if you see somewhere such as a ramp or an accessible playground, that you take a picture or a video of it and post it to socials, and saying thanks to the ADA. This was made possible because of the ADA, and before 1990, it would not have been possible. It would not have created that inclusive society. And yeah. So we're gonna see if there's any other questions in the chat box. Also, I guess we can unmute people, if Tanya, if you'd like.
Alert to host and unmuted all participants.
Is
Alert audio now
ADHD
unmuted.
considered under the
Now Martin has
ADA?
left the meeting.
Yes, because that would be something that impacts how you live your life. It's considered, I don't know, it would be considered definitely, I'm not sure what type of disability it would be considered, but it would be covered because it impacts an area and how you live your life. And also, if you don't feel comfortable putting your question in the chat box, or would like to do it in another way, I'm gonna show our contact info again. And then I'll go back to this slide, but I wanna show the Southeast ADA Center contact information, and that they're also a great resource, and chances are if you call us and we don't have an answer for you or we're unsure, we're gonna refer you to the Southeast ADA Center. Let's see. All right, Donna's suggesting that I read over that definition again. So I am going to do that. So a disability is defined under the ADA as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. That's the definition of a disability. And somebody just asked about the webinar being online. We are going to have this online. We're going to upload it to our website. And we're going to try and do that as soon as we can. Okay, and then a question from Samantha. Earlier, you all mentioned not needing to prove your disability to ask for accommodation. Does that apply to your employer as well? Could you expand more upon what you mean by applying to your employer as well?
Sure. For example, in the question that you all posed about the software engineer with diabetes and needing to perhaps ask for, a set time to be able to eat an evening meal, I believe I see in many policies that if you can provide a doctor's note that you have the item for which you would need accommodation, then they can meet it. So I was just wondering how that applied if the ADA also says you don't have to disclose your disability in order to request the accommodation, such as the blind woman on the bus question.
Yes. I will say that I am unsure of the answer, but my first inclination would be that in that situation, because you are requesting the accommodation, that you would need to provide some sort of documentation, but the discrimination part and the hiring, like they can't ask for you to disclose your disability, and like that would be discrimination, but you requesting an accommodation, that would be my guess. But like I said, we're going to have the chat saved, and I'll mark that down as a question that we can go back to and get kind of a more sure answer, or suggest referring to somebody else on that. Or Tanya, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just gonna say they find a reference for that and reply back.
I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to participate in this workshop, and I will be following through and requesting additional information, and everyone have a wonderful day and all the best to you.
Thank you for being a part of the webinar. Thank you all.
All right, Donna just sent in something. During the application process, you don't need to disclose. There's a lot of discussion about whether to disclose or not, especially for hidden disabilities. However, once employed, if you need an accommodation due to a disability, you will need to engage in an interactive process about your needs. Once hired, if you need accommodations, they will need to talk to you about needs. I'm guessing that you would need to provide documentation at that time. But again, I am making a note to circle back on that question. All right, we're about out of time today. So again, if you would like, I'm going to go back to the slide with me and Tanya's contact info. If you'd like to email us with a question or need additional information, just feel free to email us or call us, and we'll do our best. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hop off. And just again, thank you all for joining us today, and just really hope that you feel more empowered now to exercise your rights and under the ADA. So.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you for being active participants on our webinar. It's much appreciated.
Right. Bye, guys.
Bye. Have a good day.